It's easy to pick the best and worst lines in Game of Thrones. The true challenge lies in going through the landfill that is the last 2 seasons of the show and trying to find the gems amidst the garbage. So I'm going to try my best to pick the greatest lines in season 7 and 8. Number 20.
Respect is how the young keep us at a distance, so we don't remind them of an unpleasant truth.
What is that?
Nothing lasts.
So initially I thought this line was pretty deep and clever, but then I realized that it doesn't seem that realistic. I don't know anyone who necessarily distances themselves from old people, and this kind of line shines a negative light on them. Like, sure, they can remind you of the unpleasant truth of aging, but they offer so much more, like wisdom that comes from that age. From a more pessimistic perspective, this line rings true, so I'll give it that at least, and it's obviously better than the absolute mediocrity of the rest of the dialogue in the later seasons. At least it made me ponder the meaning of this line to some degree, instead of the dialogue instantly evaporating from my memory with zero impact. Number 19.
I know death. He's got many faces. I look forward to seeing this one.
This is just a simple line that I don't think needs a lot of explanation. It thematically gels really well with Arya's character, given her consistent relationship with the concept of death. And I like how she phrases wanting to meet the Night King as him being another one of Death's many faces. That and Maisie's delivery of the line is so cool and badass, so yeah, I don't think I need to explain this much further, so let's move on. Number 18.
You want a whore, buy one. You want a queen, earn her.
Okay, this may seem like a controversial pick by even including this line, due to how cringy the delivery of it may be, but the line itself I think is fine to good. On one hand, I like the symmetrical structure of these 2 lines and the contrast it generates, along with it being an empowering line for Cersei, that Lena Headey essentially gives her all since this is the only decent line of dialogue she gets all season. But on the other, it feels like David and Dan are trying really hard to get this line onto a t-shirt. It seems as though they're trying to get Twitter girls to go crazy over this line and use it as a mantra or something, which I think happened briefly. So because of that, it kind of breaks my immersion whenever Cersei says this line, but it made an impact for a reason. It's a solid line that's unfortunately weighed down by different aspects. It has the same energy as I drink and I know things, where it seems like David and Dan tried really hard to make an iconic line. However, I like Cersei's line more than Tyrion's in season 6. Number 17.
You think our house words are stamped on our bodies when we're born, and that's who we are? Then I'd be fire and blood too.
This line isn't anything special by any means, but I think it offers a decent counterpoint to Tyrion, and to everyone's perspective of being prejudiced towards Dany for being a Targaryen. And the reason why I wouldn't say this is a good counterpoint is because it's not necessarily the house words, but more because she has access to nuclear weapons, and she's starting to go off the rails mentally. That and this line doesn't really apply to most houses because they're normally positive sayings. But at the very least, David and Dan actually utilize a literary device for this line, in saying that house words are stamped onto someone's body, which to me generally elevates lines because literary devices or figures of speech elevate the creativity of writing. The first 4 seasons are filled to the brim with literary devices, like an example being,
Well, my brother has his sword, and I have my mind. And a mind needs books like a sword needs a whetstone.
So in general, literary devices bring lines out of a mediocre level and imbue them with wit. So that's kind of why I'm including this line, since David and Dan's literary device usage was almost non-existent throughout the later seasons. Number 16.
Tell them winter came for House Frey.
Similar to Arya's last line, this is a simple but effective line. The main reason why I'm including it is because she uses the word winter over other more generic words like death or misery. Winter instead is a clever way of still saying that while also being a thematic word relating to the Starks. So with this line, she's essentially communicating in a smart way that the Starks have taken revenge on the Freys. Again, this is at 16 because of how simple it is, and I don't think it can really be higher. Number 15.
I don't plan on knitting by the fire while men fight for me.
I think this is a classic line for Lyanna Mormont. It's pretty much the embodiment of her badass persona and communicates a strong feminist message through this single line. It's not elevated by any good wordplay, but I really like the snappiness of this line and how it immediately makes Lord Glover shut up. To me, it feels like an empowering line that instantly changes the opinions of every lord about whether or not women should fight in the long night. Although you could also probably attribute that to lazy writing in that this point of potential debate ends right away. Everyone just accepts women having to fight in the Great War, and it seems like this could be a point of conflict. But hey, that's just overall writing. It doesn't actually affect the quality of this single line. Number 14.
Duty is the death of love.
I feel kind of dirty for even including this line because it's essentially cheating on David and Dan's part. They literally reverse one of the best lines in the earlier seasons and call it a day. But on a technicality, it's a good line. I'm just not going to put this line any higher because of how cheap it feels. And the reason why I'm not putting it lower is because narratively, it actually fits well here. Because Jon's duty of needing to kill the Mad Queen is inherently the death of love. So in a way, it's kind of used literally. Tyrion is communicating in a smart way what Jon needs to do to save the realm by reversing his quotes. It works well in this moment, but this line obviously has the baggage of just slightly changing up an old hit and re-releasing it. And even then, I'd still put it over most other lines of dialogue in the later seasons. Number 13.
She's always been good at using the truth to tell lies.
Now, this is a good line, but I really can't think of that many examples of Cersei using the truth to tell lies. She mostly just flat out lies to people, or using the truth as a base point to fabricate lies, like what most people do. Although they are referring to Cersei using the truth of her being pregnant, and our hero is expecting her to value her life, but she lies about helping against the Night King. So it's technically true, and the reason why I'm putting this line higher than others is because of the solid oxymoron. She uses truths to tell lies, which is an interesting way to phrase that statement due to those words being opposites. David and Dan could have communicated this line of dialogue in a much more generic way, but I'll give them credit here that it works well. Still though, I don't want to give them too much credit because it's an okay line amongst a bunch of terrible ones. Number 12.
The Lord of Light's gonna wonder why he brought you back 19 times just to watch you die when I chuck you over this fucking wall.
Between a lot of different characters, I think Sandor Clegane still has some really funny lines in the later seasons. Now there's kind of a balance in that, should I be prioritizing wittier lines that are smarter, or should I also include some clever usages of humor? And I think that balance pretty much rests on the fact as to how funny the line of dialogue is, and how smart of an insult it is. Which to me, I think this line is pretty much perfect for the Hound. His pure annoyance towards Beric is always fun to watch, and him threatening to ruin his ultimate importance in the Long Night by chucking him over a wall is priceless. I just imagine the Lord of Light malding in the sky. That, and I didn't even realize it, but the Hound actually uses a hyperbole by saying Beric was brought back 19 times when it was actually 6. So that aids the humor even more. Overall, a classically funny Hound line, and I tried my best to pick his more clever insults instead of him just cursing at people. Number 11.
Sometimes nothing is the hardest thing to do.
Honestly, I think this is a really good piece of advice. However, I think Tyrion is in the wrong for saying it at this point in the story, since he's essentially advising Dany to let Jon, Ser Jorah, and other important figures to die. And the army of dead up until this point don't have any countermeasures against a dragon. So theoretically, Dany should not be in any danger, and it's really weird how Tyrion is giving her this terrible advice. But going back to the actual line, this is something that Tyrion says that has some form of intelligence to it. People oftentimes get antsy and will make blunders if they don't thoroughly think about their actions, so doing nothing sometimes can be very important. Or the option to choose to do nothing can also be vital in certain scenarios. It's just kind of unfortunate that Tyrion is using it at a completely bad time. Although, in hindsight, he was technically right since the Night King got a dragon. So sure, that was the correct decision. Number 10.
Your lips are moving and you're complaining about something. That's whinging. This one's been killed 6 times. You don't hear him about it.
In terms of sheer quality of dialogue, I'd say this is partially inferior to Sandor's last quote at number 12. However, I think this is a genius insult towards Gendry whinging. It perfectly highlights the contrast in temperaments of Gendry's whiny childlike response to the situation by comparing him to a grizzled warrior. It stops Gendry dead in his tracks as he reevaluates his entire attitude from the single line delivered by the Hound. It's also funny how they're making fun of Gendry for reasonably being upset for almost dying, but these men are so badass that he comes across as a child, which this line perfectly captures that dynamic. That and like usual, Rory McCann's delivery is always immaculate, and you simultaneously feel the savageness and pure irritation exuding from his voice. Number 9.
The lords of Westeros are sheep. Are you a sheep? No. You're a dragon. Be a dragon.
This is technically a few sentences, but I'll bundle them together into one overall line that communicates a single point. In terms of wordplay, this is a pretty basic line, and comparing people to animals has been done in the past and obviously better. But at least David and Dan use a small ounce of creativity of calling commoners sheep and Dany a dragon, which honestly isn't impressive, but the line carries a lot of weight because of the significance of its implication. Olenna is trying to convince Dany to ascend and become her true self, and I think this line is a great conduit for that point, along with Diana Rigg having perfect line delivery in every scene she's in, which also probably elevates this line for me. Just her saying "be a dragon" alone is iconic and badass. Number 8.
Kill a few hundred people, they make you a lord. Kill a few thousand, they make you king. And then, all your cocksucking grandsons can ruin the family with their cocksucking ways.
I'm honestly kind of torn on this line, because the first half I really enjoy, but the second half I think is inferior and is still communicating the same point, and I technically should include it. So addressing the second half first, David and Dan regularly devolve into the lazy insults of cock jokes, which utterly lack any creativity. This is also kind of weird because David and Dan have written some good insults in the later seasons, and then we have Bronn who is constantly saying cock every other line.
Cockless.
Maybe there's a weak link between the two D's. So Bronn saying cocksucking grandsons in cocksucking ways I think is a lazy way to write the line. Besides that though, I really like the statement that Bronn makes here, especially how he phrases his first sentence in that most of these rich families have been established from mass carnage and sheer violence. An example being the Targaryens essentially being nobodies in Westeros, and then they rode in with their dragons and rocked most of the population. Then they turned into the strongest house in Westeros. So I think Bronn raises an interesting topic through this line, and is a good counterpoint about how Jaime is gatekeeping Bronn from wanting to become a powerful lord. Even though this moment is still devoid of logic since the show acts like there's no other lords that exist in the Reach. Number 7.
It's my fucking luck I end up with a band of fire worshippers.
Now this may not be a juicy insult, but I absolutely love the sheer irony of this statement. It's just really funny to me how Sandor, a man whose fear in life is fire, ends up with Lord of Light fanatics. So this line I think calls out a funny scenario that you may not have really been thinking about. There's not much else about this line that's special since it's a quick, funny, ironic statement, but hey, every line doesn't need to be that long. Number 6.
But if I ever saw you again, I'd cut you in half.
It'll take you a while with a sparring sword.
Now, I know that quite a few of these last lines have been leaning towards humor, but I'd argue that it's easier to do humor than it is making intelligent lines with creative usages of literary devices. But I actually really like this line from Tyrion, and it's both a smart way to ease the tension between him and his brother, and it's also pretty funny. For a moment, the single line from Tyrion actually made me think he was Tyrion from the earlier seasons, a character who is quick, sharp, and funny, and this kind of line I think perfectly suits him. It's a great response that serves multiple purposes, while also making it seem like Tyrion was actually himself again, so that's why I put it this high. Number 5.
The perils of self-betterment.
Yeah, this is the most popular good line from Season 8 that you were probably waiting for. Although, honestly, it feels kind of overrated because of how simple it is, and the fact that the statement made by this line isn't that deep. But there's really not much else competition for good lines after going through the entirety of Season 7 and 8 again. So, I guess this is the start of our top 5. But to give the line some credit, self-betterment in general is an arduous task, even though it may not seem like that sometimes. And because of this, I think the line is inherently an oxymoron, and that something that's seen as a positive can be a peril to go through. Then from a character perspective, it acts as a good payoff for both of these characters, who have made massive transformations into better people. Number 4.
But then Mormont saw them, and you saw them.
And I trust the eyes of an honest man more than I trust what everybody knows.
Initially, I thought this was a line that Tyrion said in Season 2, Episode 2, where Jorah Mormont sends him the Raven about needing more men. But he doesn't actually say this, and it still feels like I heard this line somewhere else. So since I'm losing my mind, and I can't find a place of origin, then I guess David and Dan actually came up with it. And if I'm wrong, then this line gets sent down 10 spots. Similar to Tyrion's clever and funny remark towards Jaime, this is a rare later season moment where Tyrion could be interchangeable with his earlier season self. Putting your trust in honest people and ignoring the noise of public knowledge that is sometimes twisted into being misinformation is actually a good nugget of wisdom. Honorable people can be more reliable for information, and overall, this is a good and smart Tyrion line. I would put it much higher if it actually utilized some kind of figure of speech and David and Dan tried harder, but at least it was witty. Number 3.
Give us common folk one taste of power like the lion who tasted man. Nothing is ever so sweet again.
Honestly, this line completely took me by surprise because I didn't even remember this was said by Varys. Probably because the scene was overshadowed by Dany and Jon's meeting. But I was kind of dumbstruck that David and Dan actually used a simile for once. Although I wouldn't say it was particularly outstanding and still wouldn't crack the brilliance of the earlier seasons. But hey, it's still good. The main reason why I wouldn't put this line higher is the meaning behind it. It's a pretty simple statement of if you give someone power then they want more of it. Like that's an obvious thing that people know, and at the very least the line itself was finally elevated by a literary device of calling the common folk the lion that tasted man. So good job, I guess? Number 2.
Incompetence should not be rewarded with blind loyalty.
Varys 2 for 2 baby, back-to-back lines. Now, this line may not include a strong usage of a figure of speech, but I think this is a really good line that is smart, is very in character for Varys, and exposes a great topic for the nature of serving kings and queens. Because there are so many characters that get stuck in serving incompetent kings. Like, that's kind of the tragedy of Varys in that he's a very skillful servant, but every king he's served has either been insane or not caring about ruling. Varys with this line basically strikes Daenerys with a blunt hammer of truth, and makes her realize that he in fact is even more loyal to her because he genuinely believes in her. As long as she's competent and is serving the realm, then that in turn breeds unbreakable loyalty. So to me, this is Varys' best line in the later seasons, and I actually think this is Varys' last good scene in the show as well. Number 1.
There are always lessons in failures.
Yes. You must be very wise by now.
This may be a little underwhelming if you were expecting some kind of intellectual big IQ line, but those fundamentally don't exist in the later seasons, so I have to make do. But this line from Rhalyna was such a genius and devastating insult that it genuinely floored me. I think it's by far one of the most clever lines in season 7 and 8, and I think it easily cuts the deepest. Just with these few words, she states how much of a failure Jaime is, and it's also done with a sarcastic twist of the line superficially seeming like a compliment. A perfect line for Rhalyna as a character that is more subtle and communicated with a delicious amount of sass. Also, this kind of insult isn't as bombastically annoying as other more crude insults that David and Dan write. Like, I love the Hound spouting vitriolic insults, but they normally lack creativity since David and Dan just slap a couple curse words together. Or Tyrion or Bronn says cock and starts laughing as if they come up with comedy gold. So yeah, this is my favorite line, and you can probably argue for the few lines before this being better, but honestly, I don't think really any of the quote-unquote intelligent lines are that good. After going through all of season 7 and 8, I thought there would be some better hidden gems, but this was really the best that there was. It's really sad that there's this huge of a disparity in quality of writing, probably because we're dealing with a world-class writer and then 2 mediocre screenwriters. But even then, David and Dan had years to write these scripts, and had brilliantly complex characters at their disposal, so I'm kind of surprised that they couldn't write anything better for these characters. It seems like a lot of dialogue is rushed into just being used as a device to quickly move the plot forward, instead of a wonderful tool to investigate these characters in great depth. Goddamn, what a disservice to these characters and us. Thank you for watching, and my Letterboxd, Patreon, and Discord link are in the description. And let me know in the comments if I missed any lines from the later seasons that you liked, or what your favorite is. Also, thank you so much to Logan Farmer for being a monumental patron, and unlocking the tier of me shouting him out. Thank you so much.